What's up, y'all? I am back for another video. I've decided today, I was going to do this yesterday, but shit came up. But today, I am going to review the movie The Goonies. And um, The Goonies is probably I think I said this in my tweet, one of the most quintessential 80s movies, especially with like a group of kids. Like this movie, especially like people who like were alive at that time. This is because this was at the time, there weren't cell phones like that. There weren't like a lot of technology. So a lot of times kids, rode on their bikes and just went on adventures. And that's what this movie was like perfected. And you have a lot of people in here. Like, you have a young Josh Brolin, who we all know is Thanos, but we have a young Sean Astin, who was Sam from the Lord of the Rings movies. But the cast itself is really good. It's just a very wholesome movie. Like, I think that's one of the things I like about it, is how wholesome it is. And Richard Donner, who did, the Donner Superman movies. He did, obviously, Lethal Weapon, one of my favorite franchises. But this movie is just, it's like, the reason I say it's perfect, because it personifies adventure. And, granted, this movie came out afterwards, but the movie The Mummy kind of made me like, sorry about that, I don't know what the fuck that was, but because of like the aspect where they're looking for treasure, that like I always like movies like that. Like, just in general, I've always loved adventure movies, and I think they did that well. The score, like when the actual score, because there's some points they play like Cindy Lauper, who you might, very famous '80s singer. Just everything about this movie personifies the '80s perfectly. You have so pretty much the premise is the group of kids who call themselves the Goonies are facing foreclosure at their house, so they decide to go on one last adventure to find Big Big Willie, who's an old one-eyed Willie, who was a pirate, who died. While this is happening, the Fertolis, who are like a gang family, that's how the film opens up, was with them being broken out. The kids find their hideout and basically have to find the treasure. That's kind of really the premise of the movie, and it's just such a simple premise. Movies back then just could be simple like that, and the directing is really good. Like, just everything about it. So Monday will probably be my next video, because I would do something yesterday, but I got shit going on tomorrow. So yeah, my next video will be on Monday. But I've been wanting to review this movie for a while, but I just haven't had the time. There's a couple of movies that probably in the next month I want to review. Gladiator, The Edge with Anthony Hopkins. Fifth Element's another one. There's a couple of movies I want to review down the line, and this was one of them, and I felt like I had to get this one out the way. But The Goonies is such a great one. I would probably call it a 10 out of 10 film. Like, just the kids all have good chemistry, and this is one of the few films I would say the acting is actually really good from the kids. And granted, they're not ridiculous. I think that's partially why, because they're not really, really young kids. I would probably venture to say like around the 12, 13 mark they are. So it's not like and then, you got one older brother, Brandon, that's Josh Brolin, really well. It's just the most I could say, the biggest thing I could say about this movie is just it's wholesome to see these group of kids together, and then when they finally beat the villains, who in these type of movies, the villains are going to always be kind of comical, so I just expect it. But I heavily recommend this movie. Just especially if you've never seen it, it's like quintessential 80s. So, we got the Hey You Guys from this movie, so heavily recommend it. But other than that, make you ready to kick off the review. So the movie opens up with um, and we have Robert Davi. He's in a couple of movies. He was in Predator 2. He's in Die Hard. He was one of the Johnson FBI guys. Or is this? I think it was FBI, yeah. So he gets broken out of jail by his brother and mother. Then we cut to this is where we meet the Goonies. Corey Feldman, who plays Clark. He's like the slick talking kid, and I think he does that. Corey is a pretty good actor, just in the sense at this time, because he shows he can play a different character. Like, because the year before he was in the Friday the 13th Part 4, played a much different character. He was like more of the quieter kid in that movie, whereas in this he's like the slick talking kid. And then we have Mikey, like the main kid, and his older brother Brandon. And then, like, even their mom, who you might recognize as she's in a lot of movies. She plays she's the main therapist lady in the Lethal Weapon movies that always has like a funny scene with Riggs, and she was in Die Hard. But so they're facing foreclosure, and they end up getting a letter from the guy saying your dad has to sign this. Then the next day they decide to they look in their attic and they find like a bunch of old stuff, but they end up finding a map that seems to be the leading to One-Eyed Willie's treasure. So they end up tying Brandon up because we know Brandon obviously is against it because while their mom is out, he's supposed to be like babysitting them. And so the kids go off, and like that's the other thing. Like it's just that, like I think even that opening scene is so well. It's not opening, but like that first bit when they start heading to find the treasure, it's just that's very 80s. Even though obviously I wasn't from the 80s, but people I've talked to people and I've seen people who were around at the time who've reviewed this movie say like that's exactly how it is. You got to go outside and you just go on your own adventure on your bike or whatever. So they end up finding their way while Brandon has to like try to stop them. Then he runs into Steph and Annie. I think is the girl's name. I could be wrong. Andy, not Annie. Andy, who's like Brandon's pretty much love interest of the film. They end up finding the abandoned restaurant, but the Fratellis get back. Well, the Fratellis initially find the kids by themselves, but then the kids play it off, and then initially are about to leave, but Mikey refuses because he wants to find the treasure. So the Fratellis leave, they go break in, but while this is happening, you have Chunk, who's like, kind of like the I guess you could say like the comedy character. He's klutz, he trips over himself a lot, but that's in general. You always have movies, especially in the 80s. You're always gonna have characters like that, and they work. So he tries to get help while the Goonies end up hiding. And the Fratellis get back. This is where we get our first look at Sloth. Really quick. But Chunk ends up thinking he's talking to like a police officer. Turns out to be the Fratellis, so he gets abducted. And they basically order him to tell him what they're doing. And basically the Goonies start evading. And then I didn't mention you have the kid who plays Short Round in this movie from Indiana Jones, and they end up just it's a big chase, and that's what I love about this movie. And then the points where they actually find the treasure. Um, um, so throughout the film, you see Andy start, trying to get with Brandon while this is all happening. And that's why I said this movie, even though this came out first, reminded me of the Mummy. Any kind of movie that, like, same. I said this about National Treasure also, like that, like adventure movie where they're looking for like artifacts to treasure. It can kind of be like similar. And then the Fratellis initially find them, but then they evade again, and then they end up finding the ship. And another thing about this movie, it's the pacing is perfect. It doesn't go on too long. And while it's like, I would consider it more of a comedy. Um, while this is happening, you have Chunk tied up with Sloth, and him and Sloth eventually start growing a connection, which is, I actually really think is another beautiful aspect about this movie, because the Sloths are mistreated by the Fratellis, so it's like you see, like, obviously you have that initial fear from Chunk, because it's this really ugly dude, but then he actually starts to see, and then so Chunk helps, not Chunk, Sloth breaks out, helps Chunk escape, and they basically have to try to save his friends. The kids of the Goonies eventually find the treasure, and they want to try to get some, but then the Fratellis catch up. Um, so they catch up, end up, taking all the kids and trying to send them overboard. Send them down the plank. But then when they initially throw Andy down, but then and Brandon jumps to save her. Then Chunk and Sloth arrive. We get like the final kind of confrontation. Sloth takes out his brothers and his mom. And then the Goonies jump overboard and escape from the thing, and they manage to make it out. But they seemingly don't make it out with the treasure, which they were hoping, because they were trying to base it. That's the thing about this film too. That's like another wholesome aspect. They want, because it always, I've never been in the position, but it just sucks. Like when you've lived in a place for a long time, and then now your house is being foreclosed on, and you think there's a chance you could save it, so they want to find this treasure so they can save their home. But unfortunately, seemingly they couldn't make it out with the treasure. So the asshole foreclosure guy shows up to try to make the dad sign it. It turns out that the housekeeper of the Walshes, Rosalita, finds the marbles, and father rips up the papers. Then in the distance, One-Eyed Willie's ship leaves, or the Inferno leaves, and everyone's waving. You have like really wholesome, like really like nice music playing in the background. It's just, especially as someone, like, I normally like the darker, more violent movies, but there's nothing wrong with movies like this too existing that are very wholesome. No one dies. The villains are very like, I wouldn't be surprised if they're a little bit of inspiration for the robbers in Home Alone. It's very similar, like these bumbling, because essentially it's kind of the same thing. They're bumbling, villains that are being outsmarted by kids, but the chemistry between all the Goonies is what made this movie for me. Just to see them all interact, you could tell that they actually feel like real. That's the difference too between a lot of movies then and now. Is just people actually felt like people, even down to the kid actors. I don't know what it is today. Just a lot of kid actors today don't. Not all. I've seen good kid actors now. But at this time, they actually felt like real kids. Especially for the time. But I love the cinematography of this movie. Yeah, not a lot of special effects. It was what heavily carried this movie is just the dynamic between the Goonies themselves. It's just beautiful in a way. Um, the Fratellis were a solid villain for the story. I think Chunk's probably one of my favorite Goonie members just because how fucking klutzy he is. And I normally don't like klutzy characters. I mean, I did when I was younger, but then sometimes slapstick can get annoying. But I think it was done right here. The score itself was really good, and the soundtrack is really good in '80s, which I love. Um, but just all around a perfect movie that perfectly represents the '80s, in my opinion. Like Breakfast Club, I would put this up there. Like Breakfast Club is probably the most quintessential '80s movie, and it's not my favorite '80s movie. But if I had to be like objective, it's probably that one. But I would put this up there with it. Like, but if we're gonna be say for kids, like a movie in the '80s that perfectly encapsulates 80s childhood, definitely this will be number one. This and then like Stand By Me, even though Stand By Me is technically set in the 50s. But yeah, this movie perfectly captures it. They got the nice solid group of characters. Just a very simple story, which that's another reason a lot of these movies work, is they're simple. They're not overly complicated. They're not convoluted. They just keep it simple. Kids' houses, Mikey's house is on foreclosure. He wants to find the treasure, so potentially he could save the house. And then they get run into robbers along the way. Very simple premise. But other than that, the Goonies isn't awesome. I can only say so much. But my next video will be probably Monday. I'll see if I can maybe do some tomorrow, but we'll see. If I don't do some tomorrow, it'll be Monday. Monday, I'll be reviewing another Jackie Chan movie. Probably one of my favorite ones. I haven't watched it in forever, but Around the World in 80 Days. It came out like in that like post Rush Hour era where Jackie Chan was like one of the biggest actors in the West. So that's going to be a fun one to do. But other than that, I'm going to cheers to this movie. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. My fucking bowl's clogged. There you go. But if you've never seen this movie, I heavily recommend. But other than that, fuck Warner Brothers, fuck Disney, fuck Colin Kaepernick, fuck Seth Rogen, fuck Kevin Smith, and fuck Joe Biden and his shitty administration. I'll talk to y'all Monday, maybe tomorrow. Peace.